real quick. So welcome to Armchair Travel Switzerland with Peter Kramer, small and special, on January 18th, 2024. Welcome and thank you, Peter.
Thank you for a renewed introduction. I was lucky to live in Switzerland for work and live in Switzerland for something 21, 22, 23 years, something like that. I retired in 2005 in Switzerland and then moved here to the United States, to Washington, D.C., to marry and live with my wife. That was why I came here. Okay, I have to.
Okay, do you want me to open up the?
I'm still very close to Switzerland, mainly because I have 3 sons, there are 3 grandchildren, and I will be going next time in 2 weeks to be with them and see them, sort of, you know. And obviously, because I've lived there and have been to some places, I've read about it, I've talked to a lot of people. It's just delightful to talk about it because it is a very special country. And I will get into that in right away with the first image, which shows you, and this is sort of the first chapter, sort of the geography and where is it and how is it structured, and then we'll talk about who lives there and how they live, and where they went. You know, for example, to the United States, a Mr. Köchlin, you know, went. Who is it? Emily's grandfather. You know, they've gone all over the world. For example, to the United States. There it is, tiny Switzerland, in the middle of Europe. Which, you know, if you look at the world map, Europe is not that big either. The surface of Europe is roughly comparable to the surface of the United States. You know, so you know it's not big, and Switzerland is small. Let's go on. And on the next map, you see it in more detail with the neighboring countries, Germany, Austria, Liechtenstein. In between there, this tiny little thing, Liechtenstein, to the south, Italy, and on the west, France. The whole thing of Switzerland is a little bigger than Maryland, but not much. I just looked it up. Switzerland has about 30,000 square kilometers. Sorry, I'm stuck with kilometers. And Maryland has 40. Sorry, the other way around. Switzerland has 40. Maryland has 30,000 square kilometers. So Switzerland is a little bit bigger than Maryland, but not much. And as you see on that map, you know, the blue, you see the blue things there, a lot of lakes. I think about 4 or 5% of the surface of Switzerland are lakes, which is interesting. And if you go to the next map, you see, I think it's the next map, you see the mountains. Okay, this brownish area in the southern and eastern part of Switzerland are mountains, is the Alps. A big chunk of the Alps are in Switzerland, so to speak. The Alps go through Switzerland. That's 2/3 of the surface. So, and much of that is not really inhabitable. In other words, I think 80% of the population of Switzerland lives in the north, in that flatter area. And in the Alps, it is, you know, touristically interesting, but not a lot of people live there. Okay, let's go on. Historically, if you look in the detail, how was it with Switzerland? You see it there in the middle, this brown thing, Swiss Confederation. Swiss Confederation, brown, yeah, there. Okay. Still, this is a map that was shows the situation about 300 years ago, around 1700, when there were a few superpowers in Europe, like Spain, France, the United Kingdom, The Habsburg monarchy was big. Italy was all split up in little countries. Same thing in Germany. Germany didn't exist as a country. Germany was not a country. It was split up in little dukedoms and kingdoms and da 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 da. But Switzerland is there. 1700. That is, for the United States, if you look at the history of the United States long ago, and then you go back another from 1700s to about 1300s. That is when 1300 was about when the first Swiss nucleus developed. We'll talk about that, how Switzerland came about. It's a very interesting history. I'll mention some more details. Okay, let's go on. That's the map. You've seen it. Maybe it looks a little bit like the Red Cross, but the other way around. And the Red Cross flag was developed on the basis of that. So the Swiss flag is older. And actually, the Red Cross flag is something that was designed in Switzerland because the Red Cross was started off in Switzerland in the 19th century. Okay, a few images of what it looks like in Switzerland. You see things like this, beautiful chalets in the mountains, mostly owned privately, where people can rent an apartment in winter. That's much of it. Some people live permanently also up in the mountains, but as I said, most of the Swiss population lives in the lower countries of Switzerland. Incidentally, there are 9 million people living in Switzerland. 9 million people compared to Maryland, which is a little bigger. Maryland has about, I looked it up, 6 million people. 9 million in Switzerland, and 2/3 of Switzerland are not really good for living permanently, which means that those 9 million Swiss actually live pretty densely in the lower parts of Switzerland, and that's where the bigger cities are also, and we'll talk about that. Okay, let's go with a few more images. Yeah, I wish I could do that again, but I'm far away. And then, you shouldn't do this sort of skiing once you're older than 30 or 40, maybe. But it's great fun. Switzerland is, of course, a prime destination for people who like skiing. Okay. The older houses, this is also a chalet nowadays. Probably this is a transformed farmhouse in Switzerland, which had sort of a barn and had a place for the cows, etc. They're all very beautiful, which doesn't mean all buildings in Switzerland are beautiful. We'll come to that. Okay. Landscape is beautiful. This is a common area. I mean, you can see this sort of thing in the Alps frequently. Grazing land, forest, and high mountains, rocky high mountains. You notice that the forest is situated in the slopes. Much of the sloped area is forested. That's what the Swiss are very, very, very conscious about that, because it's important. If you don't have forest on those steep areas, you will have erosion. The mountains will come down onto you. So there is surprisingly much forest in Switzerland, and there's legislation in Switzerland which does not allow you to cut down trees if they stand. I mean, it's amazing. If a farmer lets his pasture go and lets trees grow there, after a while, there's of course specific regulation that what has then become forest cannot be changed anymore. It is protected by law, and the farmer cannot anymore cut down the forest. It's quite amazing. Yeah, let's go on. Highest mountain, like high mountains like the Matterhorn. The Matterhorn is not the highest in Switzerland, but the Matterhorn is also about, what, 4,000 meters high, four and something, so 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, I don't know exactly, 1,000 feet. Very beautiful, difficult to get up to. I wouldn't want to try, but it's very beautiful. Other mountains which are not quite as steep, but as high or even higher, like this here, the Monte Rosa. Also, these areas, of course, prime areas for tourism, like this guy here sailing in front of the Monte Rosa. More countryside, grazing land. Grazing is traditionally maybe the major source of income for farmers. It's very significant, I should say. Switzerland, the 9 million people living in Switzerland have to import a lot of food. In fact, half of the food that the Swiss consume is imported from other countries, which was a very big problem for Switzerland during the wars. Last war, Second World War, from 39 to 45, Switzerland was cut off. And it was difficult to get food into the country because Switzerland was neutral. We'll come to that also, the political situation of Switzerland. Since the middle of the 19th century, Switzerland is politically neutral, kept itself out of any struggles between countries, etc. So during the Second World War, they had to produce enough food to feed themselves. At that time, it was not 9 million people, it was, say, maybe 7 million people, but still was impossible. So they grew potatoes wherever they could, in the cities and everywhere, and they survived okay. They survived much better than those countries who participated in the war. Okay, let's go on. More of that. Grazing land, high mountains, forests, beautiful, wonderful country for hiking. Whoever would like to hike, it's a wonderful destination, not only skiing, just hiking. And the Swiss have created a hiking system in the entire country, which allows you, with the help of a map, to walk through the whole country without ever touching roads or much roads. You hardly ever, you always are on a footpath with specific signs, little yellow signs of aluminum that show you where to go and how many kilometers it goes to there. I've done a lot of hiking in Switzerland, and it's spectacular. It's easy in the sense that you don't get lost because all the signage is incredible. And the maps are incredible. Okay. Lakes, as I said, a lot of lakes. Why lakes? Why are there so many lakes in Switzerland? Well, the lakes are the leftover water from the last ice age. Let me explain that. Where this lake here is situated now, there used to be a glacier which came down a valley, sometimes, thousands of feet thick, enormous glaciers who came down, say, 15,000 years ago and melted down. The end of the ice age was what, 10,000 years ago. And left those lower parts of the valleys scraped out because the lake, the glacier, as it flows down, the ice slowly flows and scrapes rock and stuff, forward and sideways, and it ends up being sort of a hole in the lower parts of the valley, which then turns, of course, into a lake once the glacier has retreated entirely. Nowadays, it creates these beautiful beautiful landscapes, which incidentally, the Swiss nowadays at least have kept incredibly clean. Most lakes in Switzerland have drinking quality water in them. You can go swimming, you can, if you need to, you can even drink it. And you have access to our lakes, which is an interesting Swiss special situation. I think in most cantons, and we'll come to talk about the cantons, there's legislation which does not allow anybody to prohibit access to the lake to the public. You may not prohibit people from going to the lake. So you can walk along the lake, even on private property, which is then, of course, leads to paths along the lake, and which makes it for visitors beautiful. Yeah, this is a view from the air. The Alps are spiky, which has to do with the fact that they are geologically relatively young mountains, and the high peaks have not been covered by glaciers or snow or ice during the Ice Age. Not been covered, the higher parts. Hence, they're not eroded so much. And they keep growing. Incidentally, the Alps get higher in contrast to many other mountains, which is, has to do with the tectonics and, tectonic plates on the Earth, another subject. But it's interesting. They're relatively young meaning, they're not hundreds of millions years old, but maybe a few tens of millions. Okay, more lakes, public access, I mentioned that. Always these beautiful grazing lands. Grazing, of course, who grazes? Cows. What do the cows produce? Milk. What becomes of the milk? Cheese. Everybody knows Swiss cheese. So that has to do with the availability of a lot of grazing land. Switzerland is the origin of many of the large European rivers, like this one here. This is the Rhine in the north. The Rhine originates in the Alps, flows north through Germany and Holland, blah, 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 into the North Sea, Atlantic. Then there's another river, the Inn, that flows into the Danube, also northeast in Switzerland. And how has global warming impacted Switzerland? We'll come to that. Very good question. Thank you. Let's stick with the rivers first. The Inn goes into the Danube, and the Danube, of course, goes into the Black Sea. And then in the west of the country is the Rhone, which flows into France, also comes out of the Alps in Switzerland, the Rhone, into France, and then into the Mediterranean. So actually, Switzerland is sort of the origin, or one origin, of some of the biggest rivers in Switzerland. Oh, there's another one in the south. The Ticino goes into the Po, and the Po flows in the Mediterranean. So if a raindrop comes down in the north of Switzerland, it goes into the Atlantic. If it goes into more to the south, it may go into the Mediterranean. You see what I mean? It's sort of they call it also the Switzerland is the water tower of Europe. This is the Rhine. Aha, climate change, here we go. Impact of the climate change. One of the interesting impacts of climate change, not only in the Alps and Switzerland, but anywhere where you have high mountains that reach up into an elevation where you have permafrost. Permafrost meaning that the ground and the rocks in the mountains are permanently frozen because it is below 0 centigrades all year round. So it's solid. And that goes, say, I'm just inventing a number now, down to about, in Switzerland, say to about, let's say, 3,000 meters above sea level. Above that, permafrost. Now, that with climate change, that level goes up. With other words, the lower parts of the permafrost mountain melts. It melts. And it becomes unstable. The result being that there are landslides or mudslides or rock slides in areas now that did not occur 100 years or 200 or 1,000 years ago. Here's an example. I don't remember exactly the name of that village anymore, but this happened, I think, some 10 years ago or 8 years ago. A tremendous sliding down of the mountain here on the left, almost reached, can you see that village down there? Fortunately, the Swiss are doing measurements of, how is the permafrost developing over the years. And they knew that this could be coming. The whole village was evacuated before this thing came down. And nobody was hurt, partly because it didn't reach the village, fortunately, but it could have gone, a few hundred feet further, and it would have covered part of the village. Thank you for that question, incidentally. And in that context, of course, water is held back. And hydropower is, one could say, a traditional source of electricity in Switzerland, has been probably for some 100 years, maybe roughly, or up to 100 years. And I think about half of the electricity in Switzerland, the electricity, not the total energy consumption, electricity, I think half or 40% is created by these reservoirs that hold the water back. But increasingly, these hydropower stations also become significant because they are like batteries for electricity. I explain myself. Say, in summer, these the lake behind that, the water behind that, that dam runs down. It's low, and they could add some water, but there's no more water coming down from the mountain. So what do? They pump water up the mountain into that lake. Where do they take the electricity from? They buy relatively cheap electricity from France, or maybe also from Germany. France has a lot of nuclear energy, so it's relatively cheap. They buy it when it's cheap, pump the water up, fill that hydropower station again, and run the water down and recreate electricity when needed and when the prices are right, of course. Interesting concept. Okay, what time is it? I don't see my clock anyway. It's gone. When she's on your screen, Jerry, what time is it? I can't see it now here. Doesn't matter. I just 3:40. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. So it's 3:39. So do you want to take questions at this point, if there are any? And then
why not? Yes, please.
You can unmute yourself and also know that you can minimize the pictures if it's blocking your view of any of the screen. But for now, if you want to unmute or write something in the chat, Susan, I can't see any of that. So
yeah, the chat, there is something in the chat. One question I came to.
I'm not able to see it. Susan,
I'm trying to get someone on, so there's, as far as I know, there's nothing in the chat except that one message.
No further. No,
All right, anybody burning questions? All I can say is these are gorgeous pictures. That's what I want to say.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Well,
let's go visit let's go storm the castle.
exactly. The next pictures, I think, if I remember, yeah, the next images are where Swiss live and who they are, etc. Now, the Swiss don't live in houses like that, of course. This is a medieval castle, as you can see, and it's extremely well preserved, which is typical in Switzerland. They preserve things extremely well. Of course, they had the advantage in contrast to their neighboring countries, particularly to contrast to Germany. It was not destroyed during the war, so they keep it up. This is the Chateau de Chillon, the castle of Chillon on Lake Geneva. To the right of that castle, there's a steep mountain, goes straight up, and there is a pass. So there's a street, nowadays a highway. It used to be a path, probably, that passes by there, and that was one of the few places where people could travel from the north to the south, meaning, say, from Germany to Italy. Hence, that was a good place to get people to pay taxes. And that's what they did. They've started doing that, not the Swiss, but it was before, it was the Savoy kingdom, who just taxed people who came through with goods from the south or goods from the north. And in order to control that well, both tax-wise and militarily, this castle was built.
Peter, one question in the chat
Yes.
was, Gloria asked, where did you live in Switzerland?
Okay, I lived not far from this chateau, actually, and on that lake, on Lake Geneva in the south, between Lausanne and Geneva. I don't know how easy it is for you to jump back, but in the French.
We'll look at the map at the end. How about that? But
Yeah,
and
exactly.
we're going to
I'll
see where
point it
your
out.
son's.
So the answer is I lived in small towns between Geneva and Lausanne and worked there for the World Wildlife Fund. The World Wildlife Fund, which was set up in Switzerland in 1959.
Mhm.
And I joined it in 1974.
Wow.
Okay, we come to the cities. The cities are all, of course, on lakes. There's so many lakes, and historically, of course, settlements were easily often on lakes. This is Zurich, the biggest city in Switzerland. The economic center, a big cultural center on Lake Zurich, which is in the background, and as usual, a river flows through the lake. This is where the river leaves the lake. Beautiful old city. Yeah, one of my sons lived there, and if the weather is nice, you can see the mountains just about from anywhere in Switzerland, of course.
Wow.
It's incidentally also Zurich is, I've just read, the most expensive city in the world, followed closely by Singapore. And the third, I think, is Geneva, which is also a Swiss city. The interiors of cities are well preserved, like that castle on the whole, really well preserved. Nowadays, they have excluded car traffic practically from the interiors of towns. It's so to speak made for tourists, but it is not. I mean, the Swiss really appreciated themselves, and yes, tourism is a major source of income for the economy in Switzerland, but by far not the only one.
But also there wasn't bombing of these cities, right? Because they weren't.
Exactly right. They kept out of the war. There is not one town, I think Schaffhausen in the north was bombed by mistake because the Allies or somebody, maybe the Germans, I don't know, didn't know exactly where the boundary between Germany and Switzerland was. Schaffhausen was bombed, but only a little bit, nothing else. Doesn't mean that Switzerland was not impacted by the war, but not with any fighting or bombing.
Explosives. Okay.
Yeah, more a little bit of the landscape. I only show you this picture because it has a nest of storks on it, and I'm a biologist, so and I've worked for the World Wildlife Fund, so this sort of thing interests me. It's one of the few species, in contrast, which has actually come back to Europe now. It was practically extinct in Switzerland and in Germany and in France. It has come back. Yeah, people take care of it. They love it, and it eats mice, so they like it. It migrates to Africa every year, incidentally. Okay, my father was in the Swiss army during World War II. He saw no action, but the Swiss were prepared. Oh, yeah, we will come to that, to the preparedness of the Swiss. We'll talk about the Swiss army. Thank you for that remark. A little bit about the people. People don't, they don't dress like this normally, and they don't blow elk horns all the while, but they love doing traditional things, like performing in this little town of Moudon, with their horns. In the old times, of course, these were old men, all men. Nowadays, no, also women blow elk horns, which is good. Okay. And they dress like this, for the tourists, or maybe they dress up because they get money from the cheese marketers who want to take pictures, traditionally traditionally clothed farmers this is in eastern Switzerland, in Graubünden probably, and they, of course, also in the old times, people didn't dress up like this. Of course, it was the Sunday dress for special occasions, and that's what they do now. And as you see, they smoke. They have a special festivity in Switzerland, which has to do with the grazing tradition. Grazing, which produces milk, which produces cheese. And the Alps can be ecologically and economically used best for human, or very well anyway, for human consumption by having grazers go up and down the mountains, up high in the summer, way low as possible in the winter. So in springtime, they go up, and in fall, they come down. Sometimes, nowadays they transport them on trucks. But traditionally, it was, of course, on foot. And it was a special occasion twice a year, these marches of cows up and cows down. Nowadays, I think traditionally always they made this a special occasion, a festivity of the migration of cows, and they dress up for it. They put flowers on the cows and on themselves, carry, it's a festive occasion. Yeah. With some goats and a young boy and a girl up front. And you notice, did you see that road? See this road? This is, of course, not made for cows, it's made for cars. And it's a perfect road. I'll come to that. The infrastructure of Switzerland is unbelievable. The roads are fabulous, but not only the roads. I will talk about that. But in this instance here, of course, it is closed for roads because the cows are coming down. Closed for cars because the cows need it. Now, how do they dress and who are they? Normally, the Swiss are not dressed like this. But you probably have seen images of this here. This the Swiss Guard. Where's the Swiss Guard? The Swiss Guard is not in Switzerland. The Swiss Guard is in Rome. And whom do they guard? The guard guards the Pope. It is traditionally the Pope's army. And why are they Swiss? They are all Swiss. Well, this leads to an interesting historic fact. Switzerland used to be a very poor area of Europe. It was really poor, and people left because they were hungry in all directions. For example, to the south, in the Middle Ages and beyond, young Swiss men went down and looked for work, and many of them ended up as hired soldiers. So they joined the armies of different of those little countries in Italy. For example, the Pope's army was to a large extent composed of Swiss immigrants who went there maybe for a few years or maybe for the whole life, I don't know. But my point is, Switzerland was poor. Young men, particularly young men, left the country, looked for work. Another dramatic and terrible example is the chimney sweeps in northern Italy. Of course, in the cities in northern Italy, Milan, Torino, maybe even Venice, etc., in the winter, they're heated with wood and they have big chimneys. They have to be cleaned every year. The big chimneys in old houses in Europe were cleaned by finding somebody who would climb into the chimney from the top and be let down on a rope and clean the chimney from the inside. And there were Swiss children who went to northern Italy because it was good for children. The Swiss were the children were the ones who fitted best into those chimneys. So there are these stories about the Swiss children chimney sweeps in Milan 200, 300, 400 years ago, who went down, and up to a certain age they could do that. They probably did that, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds. Once you are too old, you're too large. And probably the dad or somebody let them down there. It was a terrible, terrible job, very dangerous, I'm sure. But it is an illustration, or it reminds us that Switzerland was a very poor country. Good. End of that story. Well, this is what the Swiss are today, and that's what they look like. And they look like us, here in the United States. And you see them in all sorts of colors, incidentally. You see the little blonde one up front. You see a darker one there to the left. That darker one there is one of my grandchildren.
So cute.
That's Olivia. Her mother is from Zimbabwe. And we'll come to another interesting fact in Switzerland. A lot of people nowadays immigrate to Switzerland. Hardly anybody. There are few people still leave Switzerland, maybe because they find it too boring or too beautiful or something. I don't know. But nowadays, Switzerland mainly is an immigration country, and like in some other countries like ours here, immigration is a big issue and a political discussion in Switzerland. Anyway, here are a few images of what they look like today, like this one.
Oh.
These people here working on watches.
Oh.
See that they're putting watches together, and the front one is actually the father of this little guy the little girl actually that we just saw, my son David, who is putting a watch together, but he's not a watchmaker. He is a lawyer. He's a lawyer. But his watch company, the name of it is Swatch, You've probably heard that name, which is a big concern, actually, big watch conglomerate of many brands. And he's a lawyer, but the lawyers, also the lawyers of that watch company, once in their lifetime have to disassemble a watch and put it together again. That's sort of art. That's why I'm showing you this funny picture here. But just to show, watchmaking, watchmaking is an important part of the economy in Switzerland.
Mhm.
Like this watch. This watch. This is a watch that is called, you see the mark there, IWC. IWC Schaffhausen there, yeah. It's a watch company in the city of or town of Schaffhausen. IWC, incidentally, stands for International Watch Company. An English name, interesting, which leads me to another very interesting, but also typical story of Switzerland. Switzerland was for a long time center of production of things that you can do at home, like weaving, like production of simple watches. That was done they did that at home, worked out of pieces of wood and the little metals, etc. What you know nowadays is cuckoo watches. That was a traditional industry already in the 18th century. And now I come to this International Watch Company story. The English name of International Watch Company comes because was given by an American whose name I just looked it up again. His name was Fiorentino Johnson. He was born in a town close to Boston around 1840. And he learned watchmaking. Then came the Civil War. He was a young man. He was drafted. He was drafted into the Union Army, fought, survived the Civil War, and after the war wanted to continue, was still a young man, wanted to start a business, had an idea about watches. He was a watchmaker and wanted to build a watch that was small enough so that you don't have to hang it on the wall. You can carry it in your pocket. Okay, small watch, which he had learned during the Civil War is a very important thing. It's good if you know what time it is, and if there are different parts of the army here and there, they need to coordinate. Timekeeping is important. So he knew how to do it, but he would need people, he need facilities. And he decided, I don't know how he came to that, together with a friend, incidentally, who then left quickly, he decided to go to Switzerland, Schaffhausen, because he had heard that there are people there who know how to build watches, how to put watches together. And he had also heard that labor is cheap in Switzerland. At those times, as I said, poor people, salaries low. He went to Switzerland. He created that company in Schaffhausen in Switzerland, called it the International Watch Company, which it is still called today.
Wow.
So it's an interesting story. Now, that watch, incidentally, that watch that you've just seen, this is the cheapest, I think, of WC, costs about $10,000.
Wow.
That's a cheap watch. I mean, they build watches and people collect them. We don't, because we don't spend money like that if we have it on a watch. But there are people who spend that money on it, and yeah, part of the Swiss economy lives on it. Yeah, one important thing of the Swiss economy and history. Good. A little pause. Any questions?
There's a question from Gloria. What is the official language of Switzerland?
Very good question. Gloria, I will come to that. I'll come to that. I'll show a picture that relates to that. But I'll tell you right away, there are 4 official languages of Switzerland, not 1, 4. And I'll tell you in a moment which they are and what to think about it. And,
So stay
but
tuned.
before we get to the languages in Switzerland, who lives in Switzerland? And what are the, we looked a little bit at the people, but this one is according to the myth and Swiss mythology, which is probably to an extent historically the truth. The founder was William Tell, Wilhelm Tell, Guillaume Tell. There you got it. In different languages. In central Switzerland, he came from one of he lived in an area that was always called Uri, Schwyz or Unterwalden, one of these areas in central Switzerland, one of the small cantons in central Switzerland. And all of Switzerland up to about 1300, so 900 years ago. No, so sorry, 700 years ago. Up to 700 years ago, all of that was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire of that huge empire. It was always, because it was so poor, economically insignificant. But nevertheless, the emperor in Vienna wanted to collect taxes, and, like in this country, taxes was one of the reasons people rebelled. They didn't want to pay taxes, and they didn't want to respect that emperor. They rebelled against it. William Tell one day passed by the central square in his town without bowing to the authorities. The authorities were represented by, according to the myth, by a hat put on top of a pole, and he just walked by, and he was immediately arrested. And the authorities said, "We will kill you." And then according to the myth, they said, "Okay, since you seem to be such an expert with a crossbow, we'll let you go if you put an apple on the top of the head of your son and you shoot it off at a distance of, I don't know, 100 feet." And he did, and he hit the apple and he let go. But then he started a rebellion against he actually killed the authority. And at that time, in the early 14th century, a independent something, it wasn't called Switzerland, was created, independent, which later was called Switzerland, and more was added over the hundreds of years. So sometimes the Swiss hear that, history says that the United States was the first democracy. They doubt that with good reason, which is not saying that in 1300 and something that was already a democracy. Neither was the United States in 1776 immediately a democracy. To an extent, we all are not really democratic yet, not here and not in Switzerland. There are all sorts of defaults, but it's an old country. It has slowly grown, and it has this history of Guillaume Tell. Many of you have heard about the William Tell overture, which is another history. It's the history of William Tell. William Tell was written that was the theme of a play, a romantic play, early 19th century in Germany, and then Puccini turned it into an opera, and there's this famous ouverture of this opera. Good. Yeah. I found this picture of people imagined how people dressed 6,000 years ago. They found a frozen body in a glacier some 20 years ago in the Alps. he just was washed out, was thawed out, and it had been stuck in the glacier for probably about 5,500 years. That's how what they found, not this specifically, but they imagined that how this person dressed at the time. It's cold up there, and there was no weaving then, so animal skins were important. Okay, but that's just nowadays a little joke. Let's go on. Talking about people in Switzerland, you think about Calvin. In English, it's Calvin. He lived in Geneva most of his life and was called Jean Calvin. And this makes you aware that the Reformation, the history of religious Reformation, which means getting away from the Catholic Church and all of that, fighting the Pope, much of it was centered in Switzerland. Calvin was Swiss, Zwingli was Swiss, Luther was not. Luther was up in the north, of course, in Germany. So important part of Swiss history. The Reformation, the revolution, if you wish, against the Catholic Church in the 16th century. And you still see it today in Switzerland. Big parts of Switzerland are Lutheran, Calvinist, non-Catholic, anyway, Christians. But there are still Catholic parts. And that's one of the confrontations that existed over the last 500 years in Switzerland, Catholics against Protestants. In fact, the only war that existed in Switzerland was in the 19th century, 1848, I think, 1848. There was a war, a civil war, and it was between the Catholics and the Protestants. I think about 50 people were killed. So, but they remember it as the last Swiss war. Okay, nowadays people look like this, like all of us. This is one of the trains of Switzerland.
Sorry.
Yeah. And how do they live? Yeah, they work in factories, they work in businesses, big centers of big companies are placed in Switzerland. Like the next shows the name of Novartis, which is one of the 3 or 4 huge pharmaceutical companies in the world. Novartis is one, Roche is another one, Pfizer is another one here in the United States, but on that level. And a few of them are actually headquarters in Switzerland. Pharmaceutical industry, but also, for example, Nestle, a huge concern, one of the biggest in the world, producing everything. That's nowadays, I'm just saying, one must not think they are all farmers. No, almost nobody is a farmer anymore these days. Most of them work, in offices, work in the watch company or in the food company or this or that. Good people. They look like us, and they assemble like this. In this particular case, there's an assembly of, I would estimate, maybe some 1,000 to 2,000 people. And this is at least the majority of the voting population of one canton. And this canton is one of the smaller ones, and I have to explain. Switzerland, 9 million people, is cut up traditionally into 26 cantons, some of them big, up to 1.5 million, 2 million people, like the canton of Zurich. This one is a tiny canton, which has only, I think, 16 or 20,000 inhabitants, very tiny. Old, tiny canton, independent. And the Swiss, all of them, insist very much on local independence. They are, fiercely opposed to anything that is dictated to them from some center. Like, for example, I lived in this little village in in the canton of Vaud, close to on Lake Geneva. And for my neighbors there, the most important thing in the world was, the neighborhood, how the town was organized, etc., elections on this or that. This canton is, thank you for the question, Appenzell Innerrhoden. There's Appenzell Innerrhoden and Appenzell Außerrhoden. I think this is Appenzell Innerrhoden, one of the very tiny old cantons. Yeah, Appenzell Innerrhoden. Nobody can pronounce it. And yeah, back to how they think and how they function. They don't want centralization. They're very much against that. So in my little village, they were suspicious of the cantonal authorities, which were in Lausanne. And this, I'm talking about the canton of Vaud now. And they were even more fearful or suspicious of the authorities of federal Switzerland, which were in Bern, And then when they were confronted with the question whether they should join the European Union, which would make sort of Brussels the capital of Europe or something, they hate that idea. Oh, most Switzerland are really, are functioning like that. They don't want to be governed by somebody who's further away, as little as possible. They want to have as much authority kept on the local level, which is an interesting concept, works sometimes. In many cases, it doesn't really work very well. This image I'm showing you, if you could just go back, because this is actually the whole voting population of this one canton. They assemble once a year and they vote on certain issues once a year. And votations in Switzerland, they are very, they love direct democracy, meaning they want to have a say as citizens on not only on the people who represent them, but also on issues. So there are votations where I lived. There are votes every quarter, every 3 months voting. You go to the mayor's office or somewhere and you vote on delegates to parliaments or somewhere, but also on issues. Like, I give you an example. A few years ago, Switzerland voted, the whole population of Switzerland voted whether to abolish the army. Abolish the army. Somebody had collected 50 or 100,000, I don't know how much it is needed, signatures to have a vote on that. It was turned down, but not by very much. I think about 40% of the Swiss population voted in favor of getting rid of the army. On all sorts of issues. On a local issue, there was, I remember one vote on whether, on the village level or somewhere, they had asked for a vote to allow or not allow the mosques to have towers. I always forget the name. The towers of a mosque. Anyway.
A minaret.
A minaret. Thank you very much, Susan. Yeah, almost drops it. Yeah, this was in that village. They didn't want any minaret, so they forced a vote on that on the local level, on the village level, and 80% of the people voted in favor of banning minarets. You can have a mosque, but only without a minaret in that particular village. Tricky, but like that, all sorts of things. 50 years ago, there was 40 years ago, but there was a vote on whether to allow further draining of swamps, wetlands. They voted in favor of that. So no more draining of swamps in Switzerland for decades now. Okay, this is now the center of the political center of Switzerland in Bern. The parliament is here. as I said, the parliament is relatively, not very powerful. It's more decentralized. They try to keep it as decentralized as possible. Still, there's a parliament. The parliament votes, elects the executive for a limited time. And the executive leadership is composed of 7 ministers, and the 7 ministers, and it has been 7 ministers since 100 years or something. Always 7 ministers. They don't want more. They don't want to spend so much money on this sort of stuff. Interesting. So this was the parliament. And then there's, in another city, in Geneva, there's another imposing building, the center of the United Nations. The United Nations, you may know, has 2 centers. One, maybe that's the main center in New York, but then there's another important center in Geneva with many of the sub-organizations of the United Nations situated in Geneva, just to show. And this building, incidentally, was built after the First World War in order to accommodate the League of Nations, which was the organization preceding the United Nations between the First and the Second World War. It failed, so to speak. It failed in the sense it did not prevent the Second World War. Good.
But the building survived.
The building survived. Back to who are the Swiss? I said it's about 9 million people. And I found this statistic interesting. Where are the people who live today in Switzerland? Where are they born? And it turns out 1/4 is not born in Switzerland. About 1/4, about 1/2 of that 1/4, with other words, 1/8, is born in Italy. So a lot of immigration from Italy. And then immigration from other countries, of course, the neighboring countries, but a lot also from other countries, meaning, Africa, the Middle East, etc. And the population, while the birth rate, like in all European countries, has gone down in Switzerland, the population goes up because of immigration. They need immigration, like my personal view is we need immigration, otherwise in 100 years we'll go extinct. Beautiful buildings. One of these buildings belongs to one of my sons, incidentally. He bought it. 500 years old. Hard to keep up, but you cannot change anything. But if you're lucky, the community helps you to finance the keep up of the old buildings. Beautiful places. My son lives in one of these, behind the tree, to the left of the tree, that balcony. More views of traditional towns in Switzerland, totally undestroyed. These buildings are not terribly old, but they're probably 150 years old. Old farmhouses which have been transformed into quite beautiful places. But people in there, of course, not former farmers. They probably work for Nestle or for Roche or something, I don't know, or in the city government, I don't know. Agriculture is like in most of our Western countries, there's maybe 2 or 3% of the population lives on agriculture. Yeah, I like to go in the little places. Coffee is like in France, you get a tiny little coffee with a brioche, pay 5 francs, about $5, which is nice. Yeah. And then you walk along, and if you look at signs, they love history, the Swiss. If you're interested in history, it's easy to learn things. Like in this town here, which is one of the towns where my son lives, one of my sons lives, in Moudon, you learn that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart traveled through this arch. It's inside an arch. Traveled through this arch in 1766 when he was 10 years old in a calèche, you know, horse-drawn wagon, with his father and his sister and a servant. 10 years old, his father shipped him around Europe, for example, to Lausanne and to Bern, and he was on his way from Lausanne to Bern, and people paid to see him. He was sort of a celebrity at 10 years old because he composed as well as played his music.
Great.
Aha. Now this relates to the question of the army. What was it again? What was the question about the army again?
I think,
Yeah, I just said my father was in the Swiss Army. I don't know if there was a question.
Yeah. Your father was in the Swiss Army. Well, my grandson, who's turned 19, I think, after ending secondary school now, he's also going to join the army. He does not have such a wonderful Swiss name as you do. Köchlin is really as Swiss as you can get. It's wonderful. Incidentally, Emily, let me say, I have looked at the statistic. There are in the United States, there are 2 or 3 million people who claim Swiss ancestry, which is not a lot, but quite a bit if you think about it. Yeah, there was a time when a lot of people left Switzerland for economic reasons. And yes, you can be, really a professional member of the army. But traditionally and still today, all young men are drafted into the army for training, for half a year or something. And then after that, they have to continue training to shoot. And this here is now, it says tir obligatoire, which means obligatory shooting. Which in this particular village here happens, on the 24th of June, 23 from 9 to 11, and then again, 2 days later, you can do it again from 9 to 11, blah, blah, blah. Look at the next picture, and you see the shooting stand. Villages have shooting stands, and all men traditionally, still today, I suppose, most Swiss citizens are members of an army. They stay at home with their gun and go shooting several times every summer in order to, keep up with the technology or something. I see these assemblies of shooters on Sundays regularly, or Saturdays or something. I saw them coming together and shooting. They always have a few bottles of white wine coming along, so it's probably partly also a Swiss, getting together, social getting together. Very interesting. The Swiss Army traditionally has had a sort of it was organized, in a very decentralized manner, like guerrillas. They would. Diane asked, do they have ammunition at home? Not anymore, incidentally. And they don't have, they have the gun at home, but the ammunition remains in whatever depot they have. Traditionally, they had also the ammunition at home because the guerrilla tactic was, the thinking was, these days, men may opt to do alternative service instead of joining the army. Thank you, Emily. You're absolutely right. Today, you don't have to be in the army. You can do something else. Work for the Red Cross or something, for half a year. Violence, yes, there is violence. I must say, I think it's really less than in the United States because even though all young men have guns at home, they Yeah, it's sort of more, I don't know. They don't use it except going shooting, I think, and drinking white wine. It's violence is not that much of a problem. I cannot say it's not a problem, but you don't, it's sort of otherwise guns are, strictly, incredibly controlled. To have a gun is very, very, very difficult. But this tradition of, going shooting twice a year or something and keeping up your ability to aim is an interesting traditional fact. And they have a few years ago changed the policy. You don't take ammunition home anymore. Not because I think because they shoot each other, that because of suicides.
Mm.
So that does happen. So it's happened. So violence in that center, but probably also they shoot each other. I mean, I can't exclude that, but it's not on the whole not a violent country. Centers of town, like here in the city of Bien, a bilingual city. We'll come to the languages, incidentally. It speaks two languages in this, it's French and German. Okay, this is in Biel city in the center, no cars. Oh, and the buildings are, pretty ugly, normal, normal ugliness. Not everything is pretty, or like this here, Yeah. And then I turned around, it was in the same space. I took these pictures in the same place. Trains. The Swiss are with good reason, very, very proud of their train system and of their bus system, of their infrastructure. There is no town in Switzerland that you cannot reach with public transport. I mean it. I mean, villages where you have 100 or more inhabitants will be reached by a bus a couple of times per day, at least, if not a dozen times a day. And I'll show you how that works. This is an outskirts of Zurich. Zurich has, just the city has 20 or something train stations. The trains are double deckers. Each of these trains transports about 1,000 people. And these are local trains that run from Bern, local meaning from Bern to Zurich or something like that. Old train stations, tourists and most Swiss like to travel by train or by bus. It makes a big difference, of course. The roads are good, and sometimes you find places where there's too many cars, but generally not. Yeah. America and other cultures, of course, get into Swiss culture and etc. Even Starbucks coffee, and of course McDonald's, etc. They got it all. Okay, the train stations have the old system of 15, 20 tracks here. But then you go underground and there are more tracks. I think this is the Zurich train station. It has 3 levels of tracks. So underneath here are 2 more levels where you have tracks going in different directions. Okay. But then you turn around, you see an ad, which brings us to the language. And you read, running needs nothing but you, impossible is nothing. It's English. An ad in English. So what is the language? We'll find an answer in a moment. Okay, the train schedule of Zurich Hauptbahnhof, Zurich main station. The heading of it says Abfahrt, Départ, Partenza, Departure. 4 languages. Here we get to the languages. So the train schedule is headed in 4 languages: German, French, Italian, and English. But what are the 4? I'm come to the question of 4 official languages in Switzerland. It is German, French, English, and not, Italian and not English, but Romansh. Romansh is a special language that is spoken only in a small area in eastern Switzerland by, I think, something like 50,000 people. But it's an official language, and it has been an official language for hundreds of years, I'm sure. And that's how it is. And every official document of the Swiss government, of the federal government, has to be published in these 4 languages, which excludes English. 4 languages, including if you have a bill, a Swiss money bill, everything is on there in 4 languages. So,
Peter, Shirley Thompson wanted to know, how many languages do you speak?
I don't speak Romansh, but I speak the other 3 languages in Switzerland plus English and Spanish. Yeah. So, yeah. But I lived here and there, so that helps. And my children keep me learning at least French. German is my father's language. Italian is my mother's language. So I started from there. This is the trend. Oh, can you just go back? I wanted to show you. Yes, amazing on this here. Okay, the languages. But then you look. These are the trains. Each line is the departure. No, back is the departure of one train. No.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry. You're getting there. Yeah, one more. Yeah, good. I just wanted to show these are the trains leaving from 15 hours to 15:30 or something. So in half an hour, in 1/2 hour, about 50 trains or 50 trains, I haven't counted it, something like 40 trains leave from Zurich Hauptbahnhof within 30 minutes, 40 things. So there's sort of like every 40 seconds a train leaves from that train station. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
On about 44 tracks in 3 levels. So just to illustrate how important it is to the Swiss, how much money they spend on it. This is not the tickets only that pay for the system. It's tax money that goes into it, obviously, as it does into the bus system, which you see on the next few hours. This is just the schedule in a small village, Mézières, in southern in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And this is just in half an hour, you have 6 buses leaving in this little village in different directions or passing through, stopping there. Mm-hmm. Buses everywhere, many of them electric, like here in Zurich in the city. And streetcars, no cars. I think this is in Bern. The trains go high up in the mountains. I just looked up what is the highest train station in Switzerland. It's about 3,000 meters high, or 3,500 meters, so about 10,000 feet. It's tremendous. They go up mountains, all electric. Yeah. And into the mountains. They go up the mountains and through the mountains. Tunnel building is unbelievable. Sometimes, like here, it goes up the mountain. Sometimes it goes into the mountain and then does a spiral inside the mountain. The tunnel does a curve. It doesn't just go straight through. No, it goes maybe down in a spiral and comes out the other side, I don't know, a few hundred meters lower,
Wow.
So tunnel building is one of the expertise of Swiss. I put this image in because my wife, Diane, when we go to Switzerland, she always complains, there are no elevators. Well, they do have elevators, but sometimes they don't. They don't have legislation that makes it easier for disabled people, to travel. It's really a problem in Switzerland. They're trying to do something, but there's no legislation for that.
Next vote.
fabulous roads, not many cars. I took this picture out of a window from a train.
Ah.
And this is the only pothole I found. It's a silly picture, but
Oh,
potholes.
hang on.
Okay. Was this the next? Yeah.
Yeah,
Infrastructure, trains. Yeah, some roads, but a lot of trains, which also, are environmentally, etc., and space-wise a problem, but much less than infrastructure that is created for automobiles. And they need to build tunnels. This is a tunnel building machine that built, I don't know, 20, 15 years ago. When was it? I don't know. For years, they worked on a new enormous tunnel north-south from Switzerland into Italy. Fabulous. I'm impressed by that picture. Yeah.
and the flags, do you want to say the
Flags, yeah, there's different cantons. On the right is the canton of Ticino. On the left, that bull with a ring in its nose is the canton of Uri, 2 of the 26 cantons in Switzerland.
So
They
the tunnel was going through those different communities, those different.
It goes from one canton to the other.
Yeah.
The southern canton is Ticino on the right. There's this blue and red flag. And the Uri flag is north. The background, I don't know exactly. Okay, talking about infrastructure, they do bicycle a lot. They incidentally, I'm just jumping back to the trains. Why is it that they have so many trains? I mean, the Alps are not, ideal for train traffic, but why not cars? Well, there is no automobile industry in Switzerland that could lobby for that, like in Germany. In Germany, the automobile lobby is enormously strong. Hence, there's always a battle about building roads. Not so much in Switzerland, where they also love to bicycle. And on each train station, you have, like here, this is a minor train station. You have hundreds of bicycles of commuters who come by bicycle from probably only, half a mile away and leave their bicycle and step on the train. On the left, I took that picture. Excuse me. Took that picture in a hotel where they rent bicycles. You can rent a bicycle here. On the left, what's the price for a day? Rent a bicycle for 60 francs, a lot of money, very expensive. Yeah. So everything is expensive. Talking about, expensive in Switzerland. Switzerland is not cheap. But, but salaries are also pretty comfortable on the whole. And I think Rima asked about the health system. The health, you are by law obliged to be insured in Switzerland. There is nobody who's not health insured in Switzerland. If you cannot pay for it, the government will help. So now nobody is uninsured. Thank you, Diane. Agriculture, I said before, economically not very important, but they subsidize agriculture, the agriculture that exists. Like here, this is a rapeseed that they produce. Speak to higher education universities. Yes, there's a number of very good universities in Switzerland. One main university is in Zurich, the German-speaking part. There is a French-speaking in Lausanne and another French-speaking in Geneva. On the whole, education, tertiary education, the university education in Switzerland is high level. There's no question about it. It's very expensive, but you don't pay. This is a big contrast between the United States and most, I think all countries in Europe. You don't pay for university education. How is that done? Well, in different ways. In Switzerland, the way they do it is they limit how many people get access to universities by placing an exam at the end of secondary school, which is difficult to pass. So, but if you pass that, then as a Swiss citizen, you have access to all Swiss universities free of charge.
Wow.
Some more images of beautiful, green. This was early spring.
Oh.
Yeah. Back to the question, how do they live? What do they do? Well, traditionally, you think, of course, about chocolate and Swiss cheese and watches, etc., all of which is significant. But the important thing, the question is, of course, then, why these things? Because, why chocolate? I mean, they don't grow cocoa in Switzerland. Milk, yes. But otherwise, the ingredients for all this stuff, for the watches, Switzerland is resource poor, really resource poor. It has electricity. I think there's one salt mine. That's all. No oil, no nothing, nothing. So they live on industry. They are very inventive. There's, entrepreneurial, have been at least over the last 200 years, and have become also, incidentally, by avoiding wars. They have, made themselves a comfortable country with problems here and there, etc. But wealth is not a problem. People are, on the whole, are well off. On the whole. A last image to show that it's very pretty, beautiful. Also, because nobody is allowed to buy this land and build a house here. See what I mean? It's highly regulated. Switzerland is regulated, which sometimes annoys people, but it keeps it beautiful. Thank you. I think that was more or less it.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. People
Thank you.
unmute. I know we've gone long, but I think I'm going to take it off recording, but we can just open it up and anyone who wants to ask questions.
Yeah, there was a question here about hunting. Do people hunt? Yes, I've known hunters in Switzerland. Hunting in Switzerland is organized a little bit like in Germany, in that there are the land of the forested or agricultural land is cut up in little districts, little areas, hunting zones, which are not big. They're, say, a couple of square miles or something, small areas. And you have to buy the right to hunt there. You have to first probably have to an exam, to make sure you don't kill anybody. And then you buy the right to hunt in that small area. And for a certain small area, only so and so many permits are given out. That's how they regulate it. It's very regulated. I mean, some people who come from the United States, for particular, they think, gosh, straitjacket this country, too regulated. But then after a while, many people think, oh, this is nice. It's really quiet here because nobody's allowed to have cars running outside that are above a certain decibel of noise. Or, oh, the air is actually clean here because blah, 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 So regulation is pretty strict and everywhere. But like, in some villages, you're not allowed to put out your laundry on Sundays, in some villages. But having said that, I mean, I lived there for 20, and my children lived there for 20 more. I lived there for 20 years. it's a wonderful country. You know, people are friendly, they're neighborly. You know, and yeah, the regulations are what the people want. You know.
Peter, can